today we'll start with a guided meditation, and then I'll give a talk about our topic, which is the conditioned and the unconditioned, Samsara and Nibbana. So, pretty deep topic to cover in a short space of time, but it really is, a summation of the territory that we've been covering in the previous sessions. So if you haven't watched the previous sessions, if you're just dropping into this one, please do go back. The first session, second, third, fourth, fifth, the delivering or discussing the paradigms in a particular order, staying connected to what was discussed previously and then leaning into the next one. So really this series is a whole. And you'll see with today, we're really just bringing together what we've previously discussed with a particular focus on these overarching paradigms, samsara, nibbana, the conditioned, the unconditioned. So let's start, however, with a meditation to help settle the mind, settle the heart. And during the meditation and the talk, I suggest you just refrain from using the chat box, and that helps everyone just to settle into meditation and then into listening, which is a continuation of the contemplation. The type of contemplative listening to a Dharma talk is a continuation of your contemplative process. And then we'll open up the chat for questions. And just, I'm very happy to answer any questions, but it can be helpful if you keep your questions connected to the discussion, the talk, in some manner, so as we can all continue to deepen this inquiry into this profound territory. Okay, so finding a comfortable position for yourself. We're going to meditate for 25 to 30 minutes. So in this, in the style of meditation that I like to teach, we're cultivating mindfulness, we're cultivating presence of mind, awareness. And it always seems practical and helpful to start with just becoming aware of the body. It's not that we're not aware of the body, but it's often just very peripheral because we're so engaged with our thinking processes. And this has become so normal for us. So learning how to become aware of the body is just shifting perspective, bringing the awareness of bodily sensations more to the foreground of our present moment awareness. So it's not as if we're not going to be aware of thoughts or sounds, but we're going to shift awareness, so let those recede into the background, shift our attention to actually focus or rest on bodily sensations. So just starting with being aware of the whole body. You can have eyes open or closed at this stage, whatever is comfortable. So becoming aware of the whole body, you might recognize the particular posture you're in, whether cross-legged on the floor or sitting in a chair. or lying down if you're not feeling so well or energetic. Being aware of the posture, how the body is positioned. And start to become aware of the most dominant sensations that are present for you right now. So that might be the feeling of the weight of the body pressing against the cushion. The sensations of your limbs contacting one another. The legs pressing against the floor or the chair. The hands connecting with your thighs or in your lap. And you become aware of the whole melee of sensations that this experience of the body is. It's not one sensation. It's a whole melee, whole community of movement, of sensation, different parts of the body, different functions of the body, within and without. And within that melee of sensations, we can start to detect the particular cascade of sensations associated with the in and out breathing. So giving your attention now to recognizing the sensations as you breathe in, as the body breathes in, and as the body breathes out. So as I said earlier, the mind's attention at this stage will still be moving somewhat, depending on how well experienced you are with meditation or what's happening in your own environment. You may be able to hear the cacophony of birds in the background where I am. As it's early morning, the birds are waking up. It's early summer. Lots of different bird sounds which can catch one's attention. So we recognize hearing. We recognize the sounds appearing, disappearing in the mind stream, in awareness. We also remember the breath, because this is our primary object for meditation. So we keep remembering the breath. It's always there, but we lose, our attention shifts. It's used to jumping around. So we, as part of mindfulness, to remember, to connect with, to notice the sensations of the breath. And then it comes to the fore in your awareness. Sounds recede. Other sensations recede. Other thoughts recede. As you choose to give attention to this particular cascade of sensations. So this is a training of our mind. We're training attention. We're waking up awareness or recognizing awareness. Recognizing we have the ability to generate intention and direct attention. So noticing the sensations of the natural breath. Allowing your attention to follow that movement. As the breath comes in through the nostrils, the chest, the lungs expand, the abdomen expands, and then deflates with the out-breath. Allowing your whole body and mind to relax. Let the observing or the application of attention be relaxed, but one-pointed, or at least remembering when attention slips away, remembering the breath sensations. We're actually training to let the attention, to let our attention rest on a simple object of mind, a simple object of experience, which is occurring in the present. Not complex, we don't have to think about it. It's natural, automatic, we don't have to generate it. We're simply learning to take the position of the observer, letting attention follow a simple cascade of sensations. Starting to get a little interested in that. This present moment experience is going to help your body and mind calm down. And with this calming down, it's a pleasant experience. We have to find the right balance here of effort. We're not forcing, applying too much force. It's a simple remembering of the breath and directing attention to rest, to know this cascade of sensations just as it is, to be aware of it just as it is. We're learning to establish mindfulness of the body, the present moment awareness. We're not creating anything. We're just learning to pay attention in a particular way. And then we want to see what happens as a result of that. So it's natural that your attention will be distracted because we're so conditioned to follow thoughts and get caught into thinking about past and future, or just slip away into daydreaming. So it's natural that that happens and will happen. So every time, as much as we can, we wake up to that. We wake up to what's happening. And we become fully aware of what's happening in this moment. And again, remember the breath. And just in that remembering, already that thought construction disperses. So we're not dragging our attention out of thinking and trying to force it to stay with the breath. We're remembering, we're waking up, we're becoming fully aware of what's actually happening. So you'll notice that the breath obviously isn't one thing. Not only is it a cascade of sensations that indicates that the body is breathing, but the quality of the breath changes from moment to moment as well. And as the mind and body calm down a little, you notice the breath slows or becomes deeper or more relaxed. Not quite sure, it's a chicken and egg, what happens first? If it's the chicken or the egg that comes first, the body-mind relaxes because of attention on the breath, or attention on the breath slows the breath and body-mind relaxes. It's so interconnected. You just know there is a relaxation once the jitteriness of attention starts to settle more on this one particular object or stream of sensations. So we keep noticing the breath, noticing it changing. Noticing the quality, experience of body-mind in this process as the breath slows or changes, whether there's calm, emerging calmness in the mind and the body, or whether there's restlessness of mind and body. You just know that directly as it is, as mental and physical phenomena. But in this process of meditation, keep remembering the breath until the attention is really well settled there and we don't need to keep nudging it or remembering it. It's fully in view and attention seems resting or no longer so agitated. It's happy to follow this stream of sensations appearing and disappearing. As mind and body become more settled, attention less agitated, you can start to notice the finer elements of this present moment experience. So we can start to notice the refined quality of spaciousness, of space element, sensations appearing and disappearing within this context of spaciousness. Sometimes we notice the gap, the space at the end of the out-breath and before the beginning of the in-breath. And noticing this quality of space or spaciousness seems to allow the mind to calm even further and to expand. It's not just, attention now is not just connected to momentary sensations, appearing, disappearing in a cascade. That might become more peripheral now as attention rests with a more refined perception of space or spaciousness. the context of the mind, or the context within which sensations come and go, sounds and thoughts come and go. So still awareness of body, sensations, but they're no longer at the forefront, they're peripheral. Just like shifting your attention when looking at the sky. Shifting your attention from the moving clouds to the space of sky itself. Letting your attention rest. So throughout the meditation, the primary intention is to stay aware of what's happening, even as we're in this process, subtly directing attention first to body, to breath sensations, and then to the finer quality of spaciousness. We're constantly aware of what's happening. And if attention gets drawn into thinking about something else, just to recognize that it might go unnoticed for a little while, but at some point we'll recognize, oh, thinking. Lost the meditation object, but right there we simply remember. So come back to connecting with sensations of breath, of body. Very gently. It's a simple act of remembering, nothing more. Remembering and coming fully into the present. Letting attention move, rest onto that object. And then kind of graduating to the finer perception of space and awareness itself. The knowing, the wakefulness, the awareness, ever present. Okay, so bringing your attention back to the sensations of the breath and connecting strongly with the in-breath and out-breath, perhaps even taking a deliberate, deeper, conscious in-breath and a long out-breath as we draw this meditation to a close. So I don't know how that was for you, but that was about 30 minutes, somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes. And I hope that was helpful. The meditations, the guided meditations are, as you've recognized, using the same elements, the same directions, but always slightly differently because this is present moment connection. Every moment is not the same. And this is in meditation, this is where we can kind of lose mindfulness and lose interest, is when we stop recognizing the ever-changing pattern, the newness of every moment, the freshness of every moment, and start to view reality as just almost second-hand sameness, kind of a projection of, I don't know what to call it, projection of sameness. So we lose interest and we lose attention, and attention gets drawn back into its habitual ways of thinking. Somehow we're more interested in these habitual ways of thinking, or interested to follow, because these habit patterns, we have to look into what these habit patterns are as well to fully wake up to what's really going on mentally, physically, emotionally, and to discover how stress, the generation of stress, the generation of suffering within our body, mind, and hearts, to see how that actually happens and how it is perpetuated, how it is allowed to continue, and to start to learn how that whole process actually doesn't have to be that way. As soon as we bring in these other elements of wakefulness, of awareness, mindfulness, and subtly skillful directing in the first stages of practice, at least, the directing of attention, learning how to direct attention subtly, we start to see how this body-mind system can relax out of stress, relax out of the habitual patterns, the running of the mind. So it's all connected to the path of the Buddha, the path of the path out of suffering, what he called the way to the end of suffering. So this whole experience of meditation is really can be viewed, can be seen in terms of the Four Noble Truths, in terms of recognizing the truth or the experience of dukkha, of suffering, as it happens in the moment. It's not about remembering past experiences of pain or avoiding future projections or ideas of pain in the future. It's actually looking here right now at the experience of stress, of dukkha, looking at how it is emerging, how it is generated, or seeing that because of the increased clarity and awareness of mind, seeing that for yourself and seeing that it is in fact created and constructed from certain conditions and conditioned patterns, usually mental patterns, and we can see how that is allayed, how that constructed activity can be allowed to be undone or relaxed, to open out. And this is the experience of the ending of suffering or the cessation of suffering in the moment. Seeing that directly for oneself, that's the third noble truth. And comprehending that whole arc, comprehending what those patterns or those conditions of mind were that allowed the seeing, the clear seeing, and the allaying of the suffering. This is the comprehension of the path. So we understand the factors that are worth developing or giving attention to in this path of practice, to allow this habit of certain ways of thinking and being that give rise to stress, allowing that to relax, to be open, to be undone. So this, the way I'm speaking now moves into the territory of our subject today, of course. It's all in the territory of the path of awakening. But I'm talking about the conditioned and the unconditioned. So these might seem like strange words to those unfamiliar with the Buddha's way of teaching. And Samsara and Nibbana, even more strange words because they're from the Pali language and also in the Sanskrit language. So I'll give some, I'll try to describe and elucidate the meaning of these words first. So samsara, in the Buddha's teaching, let's start with the goal. The goal of the Buddha's teaching is the realization of Nibbana for oneself, the individual's penetration with insight, understanding, clear awareness, the realization of Nibbana. Now, Nibbana is the Pali, Nirvana is the Sanskrit. They're the same meaning. But the word nirvana, as samsara as well, has been a little bit co-opted in our Western commercialized society. You might recognize Nirvana as the name of a band, a rock group, or a name of a perfume. I think Samsara was also the name of a perfume. And Nirvana, may have been co-opted too to be the name of a restaurant. But actually, the Buddhist goal of Nibbana is quite far from these things, in that quite the opposite of meanings. So Nibbana, when we break that down in a literal sense, it has several ways that we can describe it, depending on how you break up that word and look at the root and etymology. It literally means the going out of a flame, or extinguishment of a flame, the going out or the blowing out, or the cooling down of heat. So this word was particularly applied to the going out of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. The ending of greed, hatred, and delusion, the subduing of greed, hatred, and delusion. So this is one of the descriptions of the experience of Nibbana. Devoid and without greed, hatred, delusion. So these are the drivers of our human mind in many ways. Greed, hatred, and delusion. We can see very easily those forces playing out in the world today around us, but also within. They're very powerful drivers. And fear we know is a powerful driver as well. That would be included under delusion, and perhaps there's some aversion there, but it's more, I think, connected with delusion. So the goal is the ending. The goal of the Buddha's path, the realization, is a state which is free. Of course, say a state, there's no other way to say it, but it's not a state. The Buddha said Nibbana is there's that, use the word element, or there is that element, or there is that realm, or that domain, or that sphere which is free of greed, hatred, and delusion, and it can be realized. The other ways of describing or breaking up this word Nibbana, it can literally mean the ending of desire, the ending of craving. And often in the Pali suttas, in the teachings of the Buddha, that's the ending of craving also signifies the ending of greed, hatred, and delusion, because craving, as tanha, another Pali word, is really one of the root causes. And this is the cause you see appearing in the cause of suffering appearing in the Four Noble Truths. Cause of dukkha is craving. But craving is directly linked to ignorance. So anyway, it can be a signifier for the ending of greed, hatred, delusion. And the other way we can understand this word Nibbana, and this is a word that Venerable Thanissaro brings out, but it's also one apparently that Buddha-Dhamma, an ancient scholar in Theravada tradition, ancient, in the early part of the Common Era, they kind of translated this word as unbinding. And this is quite very, very literal, but it's also very to the point. And Venerable Thanissaro brings out more the meaning, the unbinding of awareness from its objects of attachment. So this is the release of awareness. So Nibbana is release of the mind, release of awareness from greed, hatred, delusion, from any object of attachment, from any object of becoming, from any object of birth, from any thingness. the release of awareness. So this is the what's sometimes called the attainment of Nibbana, or the realization of Nibbana as the goal of practice, is emancipation, liberation from suffering, emancipation from the round of rebirth, from samsara. So samsara literally means perpetual wandering or endless wandering, which I think is really interesting. I mean, it is talked about. Samsara is a perpetual round of rebirth, of birth and death. Say a being wandering through samsara is often how it's put. Endless rounds of birth and death, being dying and being reborn according to their karma. So karma is another co-opted word in our Western society, but it reflects a relatively close meaning to the Buddha's definition of karma. But karma literally means action. And when we're looking at the law of karma, we're talking about the law of karma, it's really looking at a very scientific fact of cause and effect, particularly applied to the actions of beings, particularly human beings, because we're looking at the teaching in the human realm here. The actions of beings which have particular results, these actions that are driven by intention. So these are intentional actions, they're not accidental actions. So the Buddha actually drills down karma to say that, one of the key components of karma is intention, the deliberate acting through body, speech, and mind. And that this deliberate acting, although it can be subconscious as well, it's not always a fully conscious deliberation. There can be this habitual kind of semi-conscious or subconscious kind of movement, which is still karmically productive. So every action, every activity of body, speech, and mind, if it has this component of intention or volition, is karma producing, in that it has an effect. And one just simple way to illustrate this is, when you throw a pebble into a pond, the pebble hits the water and there's reverberating rings out that spread out from where that pebble penetrated the water. So the act of throwing the pebble, the result is not just the pebble penetrating the surface of the water and landing in the pond. It has these reverberating effects. So this reverberation throughout that particular environment as an effect of that volition. So that's a good graphic or visual analogy for the results or the effects of action. There are reverberations that affect one's own mind stream, but also affect the environment that action has taken place. So it can affect others in your environment, but also affects this particular mind stream. And those effects of actions, some are felt immediately as that stone hitting the surface of the water, and some are to be felt later in time, or the results come later and not necessarily a known time, depending on causes and conditions. So if we're looking at this same visual analogy of the pebble hitting the pond, and in time, those reverberations, those rings, as a result of that volition, that input of energy, are reverberating out to the peripheries of the pond. Depending on how big the pond is, those waves, take time to reach, say, the extent of the pond. And what happens when they do? There's also a counter, that the reverberations that start to move back back in as well. So everything in the pond is in some way affected by this movement. Yeah. So this is just an interesting analogy to consider the effect of one action. There's a result in present time, but there are results that continue to reverberate through time. And in that analogy with that, the energy of that water as it moves back in, being pushed by the edges, meeting the limits of that pond, and there's still reverberations as those ripples move back in, affecting everything within that environment. So these three things are connected. We're talking about samsara, nibbana, and karma. So karma is one of the drivers, action and result, one of the drivers that keep beings moving, traveling in samsara, receiving or experiencing the results of actions, and also perpetually creating new actions which will fruit and result, having some effects in the present moment but in the future. So you can start to get a sense of this, what samsara is. It's this endless movement of action and result. And on the conventional level, we talk about beings who have been born, or the mind stream of beings just moving in this course of activity and result. And all of this continues and happens within and because of not fully being awake, not fully understanding what's actually going on, how this system is being perpetuated in this way. So in the Buddha's day, this notion of samsara as perpetual wandering was conceived as suffering, because the being once born has to go through the sufferings again of aging, of illness, of death. So it's conceived, this perpetual birth and death. There's only, one result of birth. There's lots of things that can happen as a result of birth, but it's inevitably bound to aging, illness, and death. So seeing these things was one of the first things that started to wake Siddhartha Gautama up. We have this kind of allegory where, before he decided to become a renunciate, he saw the truth. He saw very clearly one day an aged person, a sick person, an old person, a sick person, and a corpse. Supposedly his father had protected him from seeing these things. He didn't want him to be disenchanted with the life of a prince and the delights of wealth and good birth, etc., etc. But when he saw these things clearly, that actually gave rise to some level of insight in him. And so we have this recorded in the suttas where he says to himself, I am also subject to aging, to illness, to death. And he felt somewhat humbled when he really fully realized that. So he said, why, if I myself am subject to birth, to aging, to illness, to death, why should I also seek that which is subject to aging, to illness, to death? Why not seek the deathless, the unaging, the undying, the unailing, the deathless reality. So here we have really the shaping of this whole paradigm and the whole search of the Buddha for the deathless, which is an epithet for Nibbana. The realization of the deathless element is the realization of Nibbana, the deathless, that which is not subject to death, not subject to birth, aging, death, decay, not subject to suffering. So his whole search, and as a consequence of those insights, he did renounce the palace life, the home life, and took on the practices of a wandering ascetic in search of the deathless. So that's the paradigm of the path, one searching for the deathless element, being bound oneself by birth, aging, illness, and death. One can search for the deathless. So we have this story where he wandered and practiced for several years, probably about 6 years or so, learning all the different meditation practices of his time with the greatest teachers of his time. But still he felt he hadn't realized. He mastered those teachings, mastered the high formless meditations, but still he saw there were limitations. It did not release the mind. He had not found the deathless. Performed all sorts of ascetic practices that were very austere and rather torturous for the body, but still brought him to the brink of death, but no attainment of the deathless. So he went off on his own to try to find another way. And as a consequence, through his own contemplations, finding the elements within his own mind, discovering the means by which the mind was able to penetrate beyond the karmically productive stream of becoming, to recognize what he called the deathless element. And he proclaimed, the deathless has been found. And that was the beginning of his, I was going to say teaching ministry, but the beginning of what we have as the teachings of the Buddha. So, and it was in his first teaching, it was clear what he described in the Dhammacakka Sutta was able to assist the awakening of another. Kondanya awoke to the first stage of enlightenment, the stage of stream entry, when he heard that first teaching of the Buddha around the Four Noble Truths, around recognizing the truth of stress, recognizing, understanding its cause, abandoning its cause, realizing the ending of suffering with the realization of Nibbana. So this is another way of describing Nibbana, the ending of suffering, the ending of stress, the ending of greed, hatred, delusion, the uprooting of ignorance. So he saw that his teaching was able to help others to awaken, and so it just exponentially started to unfold. His second teaching to this same group of monks enabled them all to come to full awakening, to the full realization of the Nibbana that he also had awakened to. So this Nibbana, it might still seem like, well, what is it? Because, in our Western, well, let's not just say Western, in our conditioned way of thinking, when we want something, we usually set up this image in our mind, this idea of what it is we want, and then we set about by, maybe structuring a path of how we can get there, how we can achieve that goal. and in our everyday conventional way of working, this works. And, sometimes we have to have a plan. Sometimes we attain the goal without much of a plan, but there's been some intention and general direction. Well, let's say it can be similar in the Buddha's path of practice, but it becomes a little more refined, because the very generating of an image, of an idea of what Nibbana is, it inevitably is not that. Because that generation of the image is a generation of a condition of an image. It's just that it's a mental construction. It is something that is conditioned based on memory, based on an idea of what it might be like to be free of suffering. And yet we have to have some kind of aspiration and inspiration to begin to tread this path of practice, to feel that the goal is really worthy of our efforts in whatever way we apply effort. So there's different ways you'll hear the Buddha talking about Nibbana, and to particularly directed to different beings where they are at in their practice. So the end of suffering, he also described Nibbana as the highest happiness, the highest peace, the highest noble truth. It is the refuge, the other shore, where this shore is the side of birth, aging, illness, death, suffering, grief, lamentation, despair, all the things that we encounter that feel painful. And he describes the other shore, attaining Nibbana, as beyond all of that. All of that is sloughed off, is seen through. So this becomes actually very attractive to us, right? And yet and he lays out a path very clearly. The fourth noble truth is a path, the practice of wisdom, of right view, of right intention, the practice of ethics, right ethics in terms of wholesome activity of body, speech, and mind, and the practice of meditation, the generation of right effort, right mindfulness, right samadhi, or right concentration. It says these are the factors that are going to ripen the mind. They're going to bring calm and clarity into the mind, ripen wisdom in order to penetrate to this deathless reality. So Nibbana is not somewhere else. It's not like a heaven that is located somewhere else. It's not somewhere that I have to get to. Actually, Nibbana is to be known and seen here and now, each person for themselves, with wisdom. Or this deathless element is to be known and seen, penetrated to here and now. So this is a reality that's here and now, ever present, but described as timeless. It is unconditioned. It is uncreated, unborn, unoriginated. So early in the Buddha's awakening, he made this very powerful declaration. There is the unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unconditioned. And if there was not this element or sphere or dimension that is unborn, uncreated, unconditioned, unconstructed, then there would be no escape from the born, the originated, the created, the conditioned. But since there is this element, the unborn, unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unconditioned. There is an escape from the born, the originated, the created, the conditioned. So here you have the unconditioned, the uncreated, as descriptors for that deathless element, for Nibbana. There is that, he said, there is that dimension where there is no coming and going, no birth and death, no this or that, no support. It's unestablished. It's inherently unconditioned, timeless, ever present. But our not knowing this, our ignorance of this, is actually the main driver of our perpetual wandering, birth after birth, our wandering through this karmically created, constructed reality where we tend to find no freedom. We have moments of pleasure, we have periods of pleasure and happy mind states, but they never last. They're always changing. So this is samsara. It's a realm of change. It's a realm of conditionality. Conditionality is where there is nothing stable. Things come to be because of other causes and conditions, which are themselves unstable. So when they start to change and fall apart, then what has come to be starts to fall apart. This is a process of change. Samsara is a stream, a process of change. Well, actually, reality, conditioned reality, is a stream, a process of changing phenomena. And each of these changing phenomena are conditions for the emergence of other phenomena. But they're in a constant process of flux and change. And this is verifiable through science. It is to a large degree, the descriptor of the reality we live internally, externally, physically, mentally, emotionally. This is what, in the Buddha's language, we call the conditioned, the constructed, karmically constructed. And the mind that has not awakened to or penetrated that which is unconditioned, unconstructed, tends to find identity and fixate upon the conditioned, the constructed, the movement. Now you can verify this in your own meditation practice, the habituated tendency of attention to get stuck and fixated onto the movement, onto the changing phenomena, the thingness of our experience, and finding identity there, finding now here we find delight and joy, but there we find sadness and grief with the breaking apart of the conditions that brought delight and joy. And so we seek more of the conditions and try to create the joy and the happiness to bring it back. But it's an never-ending process. And it takes a while to wake up to this, that there is no lasting peace or lasting pleasure in this constructed realm. And to start to wake up to what, to feel like we're actually on the hamster wheel. We're actually being spun around by this. It's not all our present moment doing, but our present moment doing is adding to the momentum, and we're being kind of spun around in a hamster wheel. Have you ever had that clear feeling like, stop the world, I want to get off? I've had enough of this movement, this spinning, this endless wandering. And there's an intuition, there's peace somewhere to be found. And sometimes it's when we just say, I've had enough, I want to stop. There can be a subtle discernment of peace or stillness. that is somehow present, but it slips away because the power of this momentum and habit of sticking to the born, the originated, the created, the conditioned stuff, the thingness, the stuff that just keeps doing that. And we get carried away by that. And when there's no awareness, no mindfulness, no wisdom, no understanding of this process, it just keeps refueling itself, regenerating itself. And we receive or come into the results of karmic actions, previous results of karmic action, and engage with that and interact with that in a way that creates more karma. Now, in the Buddha's path, it's one of working both in this karmic predicament as well as coming to a full understanding so as we can actually find a way to escape, to rest out of this karmic predicament. So the karmic predicament, the way we start working in the Buddha's path of practice is through cultivating wholesome activity. So wholesome activity is still karmically generative, but it brings more wholesome results. It brings more worldly or conventional happiness and ease as a result of that wholesomeness. So the more we let go of habitual activity that tends to create suffering here and now and in the future, the things that are unethical, basically, killing, stealing, lying, just seeking things for ourselves, for our own, lustful gratification and not really having the benefit of others in mind. So many things can just lead to, quite negative states of mind and very tight, contracted states of mind, which are really suffering in themselves, But the cultivation of sila or ethics, refraining from unwholesome activities, brings more light and joy and happiness into our life and into the future. And then we can build on these causes and conditions and results because these wholesome activities bring more calm and clarity. There's less of the hindrances, there's less restlessness, less strong desire, less strong aversion. There's more energy. And when we taste that, there's less doubting about this fact. So these things actually help the mind come into a place of more calm and clarity. And then we can build on that with the more subtle activity of meditation. As we keep letting go of what we see to be unwholesome or that which produces suffering, and keep laying causes and conditions for that which allows that suffering to disband, to relax, to open out. So these are the subtle conditions that we can turn our energy and intention to. So they're still karmically active, but very wholesome because they're leading to the end of suffering, both on the conventional level within samsara or within the karmic field, but also they're creating the conditions which allow the mind with insight to find that escape. Remember, there is the unborn, the unoriginated, uncreated, unconditioned. And because there is that to be known, to be penetrated and seen, there is an escape from the born, originated, created, conditioned, which is this realm of karma. But we need this refinement of understanding that comes through this path of practice. So the mind and the wisdom factor becomes more refined, but the wisdom factor becomes more ripened to see the conditioned and the unconditioned. As I said, it's there to be known, to be seen, to be penetrated. But our attention is so conditioned and habituated to fixate on the conditioned activity that it virtually then is obscures that fixation, that addiction in many ways, the lack of wisdom, the lack of knowing anything else, effectively allows or somehow creates an obscuration. So our attention is looking over here when it's not looking here. It's a bit like in that meditation where we start with directing your attention to sensations, which is more subtle than just having attention being following the constructed thinking mind that is constructing mental ideas all the time. So we actually bring it out, we focus on sensations. But initially, you don't see the spaciousness, you're just recognizing sensations. But once attention has settled more, there's a bit more calm, a bit more clarity, less distraction, less restlessness, you start to notice the spaciousness. Sometimes it needs to be pointed out. The gaps between sensations. They've always been there, right? We haven't noticed it. Attention is not refined enough, and it's so habituated, attached to, and fixated on the born, the originated, the created, the constructed, the conditioned, the thingness. We just see things. We don't see space. A bit like now, I can ask you to look around the room at the things in the room. What do you see? I see the floor, I see the furniture, I see the windows, I see the cat, whatever objects in your room. That's what we notice. We tend to notice objects. But now if I ask you to notice the space between the furniture, notice the space between the things in the room. It was always there, but you didn't necessarily notice it until I suggested it. It's this kind of thing, this kind of example. So similarly with the unborn or the deathless reality, it's not somewhere else. It's a refined, it's a recognition of something that's ever present. It just hasn't been known and seen so clearly. When we come to know it and see it clearly, there can be this realization, this ripening of wisdom, a deeper understanding of the unconditioned and the conditioned. So, this analogy of noticing space in the room is just that. It's an analogy. It doesn't mean we become enlightened as soon as we recognize the space between thoughts or the space between sensations, or that we become enlightened if we get into the jhana of the, boundless space or boundless awareness. Because actually that perception is still a certain construct. Space, awareness. As long as the mind is resting on any particular construct, it has a support, it has a condition. And therefore there's still a subtle sense of subject-object. So penetrating to the unconditioned is when the mind, with the supportive conditions of the meditation, the mind completely relaxes out of objectification. Attention resting on something, and a subtle sense of subject-object. Now, this can't be forced. You can't make this happen. I'm describing it based on how things are described in the suttas, in an overarching sense. But you can't make this happen, because making something is setting up conditions, is directing attention with volition. So what the path of practice is coming into this refinement. We've done this subtle movement within meditation to bring directing intention and attention, to bring the mind into a certain place of refinement, of clarity and calm. And now we need to learn just to rest there. Rest in awareness itself. The realization of Nibbana will happen due to particular factors becoming ripe. I talked about this, I believe, in an earlier session. The spiritual factors that we've been developing becoming ripe. The factors of faith, of energy, of mindfulness, of samadhi, and of wisdom. Now, the wisdom factor, we can exercise all these factors to some degree. They have to ripen in order for a full understanding to come about. And we can never know when that's going to happen. We can't make it happen. It's actually, the path is one of letting go, ultimately. Learning what's wholesome in the mind, generating the wholesomeness, but also at the same time, we're not attaching to that. So this is a subtle dance. So we actually, at the same time, whether we know it or not, there is attachment, but gradually that attachment is released, let go. Because as wisdom develops, this path of practice that I've described through this series, what is the practice of wisdom? We learn to recognize that all conditions arise and cease. What arises passes away. In its arising, it may persist for a time, it's changing, it passes away. Everything we can experience is a condition. Whatever a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a tactile sensation, thought, an idea, a perception, all of these are conditioned. And they are conditions, they're created, they're constructed. They are conditions for other things to come into being. But the way we can observe that is through this seeing. All phenomena appear and disappear, have momentary existence. This is our meditative contemplation. And this is the way we develop wisdom. When we observe either through the sense spaces or the paradigm of the khandhas, the aggregates of existence, which we covered in one of these sessions, the form element, the bodily experience, feeling, perception, mental formations, sense consciousness. The wisdom factor ripens through recognizing the reality of impermanence with all these phenomena and experiences. They come, they go, they appear, they disappear. And the observance becomes such that it's just knowing that directly as they form and as they disperse, as they appear, as they disappear. So that knowing directly is supported by the samadhi, the mind which has some stability in calm and clarity. So there's a direct knowing. We're no longer directing attention to notice this, to notice that in a discursive sense. There's just a stability of presence, equanimity, one-pointedness, that is observing phenomena appearing, disappearing. Now thought, now sensation, come, go, come, go. This is how the wisdom factor ripens. What it penetrates to eventually, when it sees the mind in its own clarity, sees quite clearly these conditioned factors appear and disappear all by themselves. They're in the realm of karma, they have their own momentum. They can suddenly just disband in your own direct perception. And in that disbanding, what remains or what is present is penetrated to as that which is unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unconditioned. It's not a me, not a mine, but it has an inherent quality of presence. It's not known discursively or objectively, but there's presence, timeless. So when the mind penetrates to this, it cannot be forced. That is the taste of the deathless. Depending on the depth of that realization and how ripe the spiritual faculties are in one, that realization may cut away some of the fetters, some of those 10 fetters we talked about last time, or all of them, depending on how ripe those spiritual factors are. Nevertheless, just one glimpse of the deathless element can bring one into stream entry, the path of the stream enterer, where one's full deliverance is assured, one's full deliverance from the perpetual wandering of samsara is assured, but it may take up to 7 more lifetimes before full liberation is realized. Or it can happen in this very life, depending on, as I say, the ripening of those spiritual faculties, which will just continue to ripen as a result of that insight. But if one applies oneself further, it can ripen more quickly. So I hope I've been able to convey somewhat the dimension of all these terms, samsara and nibbana, the conditioned, the unconditioned, as it relates directly to our everyday practice of meditation and the path of awakening. I hope these words haven't been too obscure. I hope you've been able to recognize what I'm talking about within your own experience and to see to some degree how this path unfolds and what the Buddha is pointing to. So I'm going to open up the chat for some questions now, and we'll see what your questions are. We'll be able to elucidate more, see where you'd like some more guidance or more elucidation on particular points. So so there was a question which came in early, which is on this point. How do you make the difference between the craving for non-existence and the wish to attain nirvana, sometimes called the great extinction? Yeah. So, sorry, I've got a bit of a cramp in my foot here. I'm just changing position. Yeah, no, good question, because this gets conflated a lot. The great extinction, I mean, it can sound like this is, the Buddha taught a lot on what he called the middle way, and the path, the Eightfold Path, the fourth of these noble truths, is called the middle way, the way of practice to realize the cessation of suffering. And he called it the middle way because it goes between two extremes, the extreme of eternalism and the extreme of nihilism. In the Buddha's day, there were a lot of different religious understandings, different practices, different paradigms, but many of them lent to one or the other. This idea that, I am a permanent something that can realize, that can find eternal existence, right? And he called this kind of eternalism. And nihilism is the notion that, with death, just everything stops. There's nothing more. So it's a bit of a denial of karma in some sense. Or it can also be in the guise of there is nothing. Nothing truly exists. There is nothing at all. So it goes, it kind of goes past seeing conditionality, seeing that conditions have a cause, they come to be through a cause, and they cease with the cessation of that cause. And that the deathless, the unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unconditioned is that which is to be realized, is the ultimate liberation. So this sense of nihilism that says there is nothing moves past this middle way, which the Buddha said, produces light, understanding, insight, and liberation. Liberation is not nothing, although liberation comes through the understanding of seeing the empty nature of all conditions, that conditions are not concrete thingness, they are momentary arisings within a process. And our delusion projects a somethingness, concrete somethingness onto them. But once the process nature is understood and that identification with impermanent things is let go of and relaxed, that which is unborn, uncreated, can be realized. The inherent reality, which gets other words put upon it in other traditions, inherent awareness, unmoving, without subject object, timeless, or by any other names within Advaita, the self with a big S, or Parabrahman, Paramatman, the ultimate reality, the unborn, the ultimate peace, the Buddha called it, the ultimate happiness. Anyway, so to avoid the extreme of nihilism, extinction actually is a word which leans to that, right? So we've got to be a little bit wise about our use of language. Scrolling back to this question. So what's the difference between craving for non-existence, which is vibhavatana, craving to not be, craving for the end of existence, and the wish to attain nirvana? Well, craving for the end of existence is just that. So I kind of brushed over this in the talk. It's not, you can't create nirvana, you can't create the realization of the deathless, you can't create this goal, and ultimately you can't even aim at it as an object, because it's not an object, it's not a thing. The craving for non-existence is an aversive response, craving to not be. Why do we crave to not be? Because we don't want this experience of being. So This is where perhaps recognizing the truth of suffering in the moment can lean into aversion. There's still attachment. And so it craves to be free of this. I don't want this, but it's subtly leaning into aversion. So it's still craving, it's still attachment. And then you get caught up in a nihilistic trying to get rid of or not wanting. This isn't liberation. It isn't even dispassion. So this is where the Buddhist path is one that's quite refined. So we recognize what has come to be, even if it's painful or dukkha, pleasure or pain. It just is as it is. Wisdom takes the route of seeing the impermanence of it. It arises, it's conditioned, it passes away. If there's identification with that, there's attachment, there's suffering, there's craving. Whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, if there's identification with it, if you think it's you, if you take it to be me and mine, it leads to more rebirth, more continuance in the round. If you learn to see its impermanence, its constructed nature and its empty essence, it's not who and what you are. It's a conditioned phenomena, appearing, disappearing. When you see that, this is released through seeing clearly with wisdom. And this is called dispassion. It's not a not wanting, it's a seeing clearly that it's not worth clinging to, because it's just constructed, impermanent, going in one direction only, which is round and round and round, right? So it's this point of, this is why we cultivate, in some sense, that still point of awareness of the observer, even though that might still have a subtle sense of subject to it originally. In our practice, that sense of subject can drop away. But the aim, the understanding with wisdom is to see everything that arises ceases, is empty of true self-nature, empty of true existence, because it shows these signs. So the Buddha said, what are the three characteristics or the signs of the conditioned? They demonstrate arising, they demonstrate change as they're hanging around, they demonstrate or they show this sign of passing away, of destruction. They're the three signs of conditioned. And what are the three signs of the unconditioned? It doesn't demonstrate or show any arising. It doesn't show any change as it persists, and doesn't show any destruction or passing away. Beautiful, succinct little sutta. So craving for non-existence is just another form of craving that leads to rebirth. So true dispassion arises through seeing with wisdom the truth of impermanence and empty nature of all changing conditions. That dispassion allows, or is that releasing of attachment, clinging, identification. And dispassion leads into awakening, the realization of Nibbana, the cessation of these constructed, these mental constructs, the falling apart of that, and the realization of the unconstructed. So Alex says, thanks for the new series, Working with Challenging Emotions. Great, I'm glad you find that helpful, Alex. Detachment, sometimes good not to keep temptations around. Sometimes temptations are not avoidable. So we live in the world, but not of it. Yeah, I like that phrase. Be in the world but not of it. But we are in the world, but we learn to work with things. Obviously, we start from a place where we recognize there's attachments, there's identifications. But just as I described, practicing to see with wisdom the arising and ceasing of conditions, internally and externally. So internally we see, Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, these are momentary appearances. And sometimes they grab our attention and sometimes they pull us in, but we can keep observing that and the results of that. Really helpful. So this is how we ripen wisdom. How important is practice within a community? I've been practicing for a while and feel I need to practice with others, longer retreats, etc. Or is practicing alone just as good? Both. I mean, I still find it's good to sit with others and teach and connect, to discuss the Dharma, to hear teachings from other teachers, whether that's when you're alone and listening through your headphones or being in a group in retreats. Going to teachings, going to retreats can be helpful. They can be kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Can help catalyze one's aspiration and inspiration. And being in a group, you have a wider awareness of what's appropriate in terms of sitting. And sometimes that group energy just can help the mind stay more clear and awake and aware than when we're alone. But then sometimes just being alone can help the practice in other ways. So, but we can become habituated either way. So it's just, I like a combination of both. And sometimes it's just circumstantial. Sometimes we have to practice alone. There's no group opportunity, but when the opportunity arises, we can connect with that if we feel the inspiration to do so. So both are helpful, and definitely hearing teachings from others and feeling connected to others developing the path can be really supportive. So Niall says he's going to go back and listen to all of the 6 installments of Buddha-Dhamma. Something you said today made me think of the Buddha's path differently. Okay, that's great. Yeah, and I would say to everyone, I mean, if you've heard it once, that's great. But, you know, my experience with hearing things is you can go back time and time again and get new stuff out of it. In many ways, as your understanding matures, you see more into the subtlety of what's being said. So there's always more and more layers that can help ripen the wisdom. That's good. So I think that's a part of a question. Niall's got one of 3 there, so I'll just scroll down and continue that. When the young Buddha saw the old person, sick person, dead person, he realized that he was not exempt. Yeah. And his entire worldview changed. He took steps to entirely change his life. As leaving the palace, this great upheaval would subjectively be considered by most, including myself, to be an awakening. Is this actually to be considered to be his first awakening? It is an awakening in some sense. It's not the stream entry, I don't think. It's not packaged as that. But it's a clear insight into impermanence and into the constructed reality and the limitations of that. And it was powerful for him because, as you say, it was an upheaval. It's said in the story that he actually couldn't, he just didn't feel he could continue living the way he was with this level of understanding. He was not content to stay and live the way he was before. And because of his sincere search for the deathless, I mean, he was a Buddha to be, is a being who already obviously had a lot of ripened wisdom. to even penetrate to this level in his life, but that, you know, it really awakened his aspiration. And it was in his, I think it was in his mid to late 20s. And for many of us in our late teens and early 20s, you know, sometimes younger, we are sometimes really taken with this search for understanding, because we're encountering the world as we grow up. It's a very confusing place, and we're kind of soaking up the way the world expects us to be or socializes us to be, and what it tells us we should want, and etc. But we're also questioning a lot at the same time, and really looking into our hearts and wondering, you know, what's really worth wanting. And this is kind of what the Buddha came upon. What's worth wanting? Why do I continue to seek what is subject to aging, decay, and death? Why didn't I seek that which is death-bound? So the fourth, these are called the Devadutas. So the three, an old person, a sick person, and a corpse or a dead person. They're the three. But then he saw a fourth sign. I'm just plugging in here. A fourth sign. He saw a religious mendicant with walking by, I think, with an alms bowl. And he saw that this person's countenance was calm and serene. And that triggered something in him. He said he recognized there is a path, there is a way that he could follow to search for the deathless. So this is the fourth sign, that of a religious practitioner, or someone who was he saw someone dedicated to the path or to the way of practice in search of the deathless. So these were the four signs. They're called Devadutas, heavenly messengers, which served to wake him up. So these are like karmic reminders in a way. You see something really clearly and you want to get it, set his priorities in order. And this is what insight does quite often. Clears out the extraneous and helps us just refocus. That's what happened for him. So thanks for that, Niall. I use these meditations on YouTube and my favorite app. Okay, that was previous. Great. Finn, what does it mean when one won't listen to the other and will put the other person down? The other person being put down is stabilized in being and secure. Both are applying themselves. I'm not quite sure what your question means, Fins. What does it mean when the other won't listen to when one won't listen to the other and will put the other person down? The other person being put down is stabilized in being insecure, but both are applying themselves. There's potentially a few things with that, but what does it mean when one person won't listen to the other and will put the other down? It could mean a number of things. But that person is not ready to listen, is holding some other view. If they're putting someone down, then that's already just seeing whatever, if it's you, whatever you've got to offer, they're not interested in that right now, and they don't think it's not something they value, so they conflate it with you and maybe put you down. But on the converse side, if you're trying to say, I've got something really good, why won't you listen to me? And the other person's not listening, they're not ready. The Buddha was very astute as to when he taught, why he taught, and how he taught. It was always about the readiness of the individual or the group, always about appropriate timing, appropriate place, never really teaching to those who are not interested, because there's no point there. Sometimes something may be said in a situation where someone isn't interested and it does pique their interest, but one has to be quite sensitive as to what's appropriate when. And in our Buddhist training as monks and nuns, we're not supposed to proselytize. We're only supposed to teach if there's an invitation to teach. Otherwise, we remain silent and unexpecting. And we do our own practice. So people, when they want to hear the Dhamma, they will ask or come to a situation like you've come here because you want to hear the Dhamma. So I can trust that whatever I say is going to pique your interest to some degree or another. So then it's going to go in. And that's the, the first spiritual faculty is that of faith. Faith is saddha. It gets translated as faith, trust, or confidence. You have to have a certain amount of confidence or faith or trust in what you're hearing to even turn your interest towards wanting to hear, to let that come in, to give it space. So that faith, that openness to want to hear, to want to know, it allows the Dharma to come in, to then you can contemplate it, then you can work with it. If there's not that openness, it's not going anywhere. So better just to live, cultivate your wholesome life, and if people want to know, they'll ask or they'll notice, and just noticing that something is working for you, they may come to ask. Great. Okay, Finn has got some clarity there through the other answers. Thank you. When is it good to keep temptations away, and when is it good to accept them as unavoidable? Well, if we just see temptation as temptation, people are tempted by different things, and sometimes people feel more resilient to not get drawn in, and at other times they don't feel that resilience and they get drawn in. Best to just keep your mindfulness, be mindful, cultivate mindfulness at all times, just to know what's going on, to recognize temptation when it arises and contemplate that. If it's a particular piece of food that you really love, but maybe it's not good for you, and you've set this intention to not have it, but there it is. Oh, something in you, the habit is really wanting it, but your wisdom mind is saying, oh, last time you ate that, you didn't feel so good, so don't do it. But there's this wanting, and then, now we're in a struggle. Just keep being mindful of that. So, okay. You can contemplate, if that wasn't there, that piece of chocolate cake or whatever it is, just as an example, without visual contact, would that temptation have arisen? No. So that temptation actually was dependent on visual contact. So then you might say, okay, don't bring it into the house, then I won't be tempted. That's wisdom. Right? But sometimes you're out and about, you walk past a cake shop and there's that big chocolate cake in the window and your eyes become 10 times bigger. It's like, wow, I want. This is an obvious gross example, but you can fill in whatever your desires. There it is, I want. Once again, visual object. Because there's a memory, a perception that this was pleasant in the past, suddenly it's, pleasant. That will be really nice if I had that. I want it. All of the attention is fixated on this. So you either say, I don't walk past that cake shop again, and that won't happen. That's one way of avoiding. Or with wisdom, walk past that cake shop every day and contemplate visual contact. The arising of contact is the arising of feeling. Feeling being pleasant feeling based on memory. That was nice in the past. With feeling as condition, craving arises. So this is key in the law of dependent origination, which is the law of conditionality. based in ignorance to begin with, leading to suffering at the end, birth, aging, death, and suffering. The middle component, everything arises first at sense contact. Nothing arises outside of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. It's just these 6 sense doors, so we can start to contemplate the conditioned arising of that craving for something is dependent on contact. In this case, visual contact. It may be something else dependent on hearing, someone whispering into your ear, chocolate cake. Yeah. Seeing, smelling someone baking, smelling the delightful smell of cocoa. So seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, actually tasting it and thinking, oh my God, that is the best chocolate cake. I want more. Touching, if you like your finger in icing or something, that's one possibility. Thinking, you can easily think of chocolate cake and desire arises, right? But it's based on, if the feeling comes in between each moment of sense consciousness, with sense contact, there is a feeling, either pleasure or pain. I discuss this in my new series on looking into desire and fear, how pleasure and pain is based on a memory of past pleasure. Fear and desire is based on a memory of past pleasure or past pain. Desire based on memory, past pleasant feeling. Fear based on memory, past painful feeling. This is the Nisargadatta points this out. But in the Buddha's dependent origination, we can get great insight by contemplating these moments of dependent arising. Without sense contact, craving can't arise, feeling can't arise. But with sense contact, there's either pleasant, painful, or neutral feeling. Based upon that, craving, if it's unseen, unknown, that is, if ignorance is operating, craving will inevitably arise. But if we're knowing and seeing, and if at that moment we have clarity and resting in awareness, feeling arises and ceases very quickly. Sense contact arises and ceases very quickly. So does the corresponding feeling. Craving may or may not arise if there's full awareness. But if craving does arise in full awareness, you see it clearly and it ceases, because that is its true nature. All these dependent arisings arise and cease very quickly. It's only when we don't see that, attention gets stuck to it as real things and real objects that can bring gratification, or real objects that are fearful that we need to avoid in order not to feel fear. So this is the creation of samsara right here. If you can see that process with wisdom, that whole construction can fall apart and you can taste freedom from that. So whether or not you remove temptations or not, depending on where and how you want to practice. Sometimes it's good to remove temptations if there's no resilience to stop the indulgence. Other times, contemplation, because contemplation with wisdom is the ultimate way out, not just renunciation and willpower. That is a means, but the end is wisdom and liberation through wisdom. Okay, would it be possible to speak on the afterlife realms, what the stream entry may offer in afterlife realms? Well, rebirth is just the continuation of karmic production of activity. With the death of this body, if there's, for one who is not awakened, there's just the momentum of karma. Ignorance, karma, and craving are the components that propel beings into renewed birth. So just through karmically created conditions, attachment, clinging, craving, becoming new forms of birth emerge. Now, if for a stream enterer, they would still similarly be karmically, be caught in a karmic process because they're not fully awakened. There is the wisdom factor, there's right view already established, and so there's to some degree or another an ability to recognize the deathless element. So this is quite powerful. Approaching the time of death, there's potentially an increased potential for full awakening as the body dissolves, if there's sufficient mindfulness and awareness to stay with such process without clinging. Otherwise, it's still, any kind of rebirth is still karmically conditioned. But for a stream enterer, there's a great deal of wholesome qualities in that mind stream. It is said for a stream enterer, the gates to the lower realms are closed, so they can't take a lower birth in hell realms or animal realms or other things. So it would be human realm or higher, some kind of deva realm. So wholesome, more wholesome, more refined states. So Reverend Dillis says, where did I find that? The internet brings a lot of unwanted temptations. Indeed, it is a bit of a thing to navigate, isn't it? These days, because we do a lot of work on computer and on the internet, it's easy to get distracted, easier to get distracted than pre-internet days. You know, I reflect on this often, you know, because I did train initially as a nun before the advent of the internet and computers. And yeah, the path of practice, even though you can get distracted, the path of practice was less distractible. But, you know, though this world has become computer-based, so much of our work depends on the internet, and, you know, and also so much of our access to Dharma is dependent on the internet as well. So we just have to keep exercising wisdom around what's wholesome, what's unwholesome, what's worth giving attention to, what's not worth giving attention to. And also to be kind to ourselves, not to give in to our temptations, but to recognize, you know, temptations will still arise. Desire for pleasant things will still be there until one is really able to abide in a more refined pleasure of meditation. There'll still be attachment and desire to seeking pleasure from the sense realm. So to understand that this is natural, but to infuse it more and more with wisdom, what's worth giving our attention to. And that changes from time to time, but you know, we have to, you know, walk this path for ourselves. And if you remain interested, even this question of what's worth giving attention to, I mean, the Buddha said nothing whatsoever is worth clinging to. But even, you know, meditation and the results of meditation, but he didn't say don't develop meditation. You know, so those more refined things that we develop can lead to realizing the highest release and peace of not clinging. But we also live in a world with other beings and a conventional world of relating in different ways. So we have to engage with certain things, but we can engage with wisdom. Just like the Buddha engaged with his community, Buddhist and non-Buddhist, lay and ordained, and used and engaged with the conventions of the world whilst not being caught in them or by them. as you said earlier, to be in this world yet not of it is kind of the ultimate abiding in Nibbana, in the sense. You can still engage with this world, but there's the wisdom of knowing the conditioned and the unconditioned. So the mind that doesn't cling can still engage with wisdom. Whilst we still have the tendency to cling and attach, we just have to examine that. Is it permanent or impermanent? Does it give rise to suffering or stress or peace? Is it really who and what I am, or is it empty of true concrete existence? These are the three characteristics that we need to contemplate for wisdom to ripen. How does one deal with a selfish, narcissistic member in community? They act fake and gain your trust and empathy, but return no true action of love. Well, just to contemplate their predicament as one of suffering, to bring forth compassion. That's the best way of relating or holding other people who may be a cause of some form of suffering for you. They're certainly experiencing much more suffering, and you have the ability to contemplate with wisdom and arouse compassion, so you're in the better position to not be taken in, to not identify or attach to these experiences that may arise. It's still felt, but keep letting go and keep generating that wisdom and compassion that will free you and ultimately help them. Can the pain be a doorway to being or some realm? So the contemplation of dukkha, suffering, as in the first noble truth, we have to recognize this experience of stress, this experience of pain, whether it be physical, mental, or emotional, in order to see it for what it is. When we see it for what it is a doorway to liberation. When we see that we have conditioned resistance to pain and suffering, that we habitually identify with it as I, me, and mine, and then develop aversion, want to get rid of it or push it away or destroy it. We see that that's how aversion is perpetuated. So we find a way of recognizing, seeing suffering in the moment, sensation, a mind state. It usually, suffering at its root has the concept of I, me, mine. We're identifying, we're concretizing it. When we see that it's actually a changing condition, not truly who and what I am, that contemplation then becomes a doorway to liberation. Knowing the fear is based on past pain, are you saying that it is not the current situation, sickness, that is causal, but is more of a trigger? Anything can be causal, any condition can be a result of some past action and simultaneously a cause for new activity. So it can be a trigger. So sickness can be a resultant of past activity, but its current manifestation can be a cause or condition. If you're not seeing it clearly for what it is, it can be a trigger for, just as I described, say, aversion to painful feeling, I don't want, which can be a trigger for more pain, more attachment, more suffering. Or if we see it with wisdom, it's just a manifestation. Nothing arises without a cause. Past causes, this sickness is experienced. What is this sickness? We look at its painful, unpleasant physical feelings, perhaps giving rise to unpleasant mental states, unpleasant emotional reactivity. But that emotional reactivity may be more the result of identifying and not wanting, pushing away, pushing against, resisting this experience. As soon as we recognize it just is what it is, no need to push away. Of course, it's unpleasant. Can I breathe with that? The attachment begins to open out, fall away, and what may have been triggered as unpleasant emotional reactivity can also subside. So this is something to be explored within your own experience, to learn to know how this works for yourself. So, yes, the internet is a window to 8 million worlds or more. Indeed. It gets irritating when hanging around the worldly types, so to speak, just the total unawareness of thought forms and patterns. Well, that irritation is something you need to look at, Mark. Irritation is a manifestation of aversion. Why is there irritation arising? Judgment, perhaps around so-called worldly types. They might not be in the same stream as you are, not interested in the same things as you are, but they're suffering beings in the same way as we are. And it's true, they may behave in ways that are very unfortunate and foolish, in that behaviors can just be, stacking on the suffering for themselves and others. But is the correct response from us irritation? We may be irritated. We notice that. What is that about? The generation of compassion for all beings, because all beings are in this predicament, influenced to one degree or other with greed, hatred, delusion. We have to see the ubiquitousness of that, but also recognize what the way of practice in order to not be caught into that, to not be caught into reacting with greed, hatred, and delusion. We see the reactions if they arise, but that's not who and what we are either. These are all karmically driven processes that beings are subjected to until they fully awaken. So arousing that compassion is really one of the best ways to bring wholesomeness into the world and to support your own mind stream to relax out of the karmic conflagration. Thank you, Reverend. Glad you found that helpful. Who produces the background music of your recent meditation sessions? Meditation sessions. I'm not sure if you're talking about Samaneri Jayasara's offerings on Wisdom of the Masters. She organizes all that background music. Unless you're talking about our meditations which are on the Waking Up app, but we generally organize that music rather than having the app's generic background sounds, because we don't find they work well. So Mark says, I'm going to use this busy, chaotic city as Dharma. Very good. And to be led by the Holy Spirit through it all, following synchronicity, to learn and grow and also laugh and love. Very good. Yeah, wherever we're at has to be our place of practice. Wherever you find yourself now is our place of practice. It is our place of awakening. If you're searching for somewhere else, that awakening won't happen. Awakening is here and now, wherever we are with whatever conditions are presenting themselves. That's the possibility. How to disregard the ego's narratives. Well, like earlier things, we have to see them. first. The narrative is the narrative. Just see it for what it is. We don't have to judge it. We merely see it for what it is. And then its limitations become apparent, and dispassion with regard to them arises naturally. Without aversion, without pushing them away, without a judgment. Just see it for what it is. We all have it. You spoke today of the space within and without. Would you say that space is really all that there is? We may colour the space with our own creations, but there is only one space. Yes? In one way, we could say this. So I was directing you to recognize the space as the context within which forms appear and disappear. Whether they're the external forms such as furniture in the space of the room, clouds in the space of the sky, or internally, thoughts in the space of awareness itself. So the space of awareness itself, we can talk about space and awareness as refined factors of mind a little bit differently, but these are called boundless qualities. Space is boundless. You can't find through perceiving space, you actually don't find the edges of it. You don't find the edges of sky, as in the space of sky, or even scientifically, we can't find the limitations of space in the cosmos. We can't find it. Is it there? We don't know. We certainly can't find it. Same when we look internally, when we recognize space, it is a boundless characteristic. So similarly with awareness, when we recognize awareness itself, like space, it is boundless. Now in meditation, for someone who is practicing at quite a refined level, they can take those perceptions of boundless space or boundless consciousness and remain in that state, perception of boundless space or boundless consciousness. But those states are dependent, these jhanas are dependent on that perception and the ability of attention to remain established on that perception. But in the Dzogchen tradition, we're encouraged to see the basic space of awareness as actually space and awareness are not separate qualities of this basic space of awareness. There's both space and awareness, not two, but as two aspects of the one. So we can start to recognize this within our practice as qualities. Okay, we're coming to the end of our time. And looks like the questions are winding up, which is good. Does synchronicity increase with awareness? Potentially. Can we have more synchronicity than we should? No. And then there's these last two questions around soul. What is the soul? Can my soul be given up for another? No. Anyway, you need two souls, one to give up the other. I think you're responding to Lisa. You know, soul, we'd have to unpack that. What do you mean by soul? We don't tend to use the word soul in the Buddhist tradition, but we know what you're speaking about. But we would need a lot of time to unpack that. But generally, can it be given up for another? No. No. Ultimately, there's only one. So, okay, we're going to wind up now. There's a few other comments there, but basically we've been connected for a bit, well, nearly 2.5 hours. For some of you, it's very late where you are. So I want to thank you all for your time and your interest and for tuning in to this Buddha-Dhamma series. As I said before, please do go back, make use of them. They'll always be up there. I might edit out some of the beginning bumps so that when people go onto YouTube, we can move straight into the teachings or the meditations. But I hope they prove helpful and keep revealing layers of this quite profound Buddha-Dhamma more deeply in your life and in your practice. So we'll be doing some new series next year, and in 2 weeks' time you'll see Venerable Jayasara. She'll do the meditation, guided meditation and Q&A, the last one for the year. So do tune into that and we'll tell you more about what's on offer for next year. So take care, be well, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.